Just four folks to describe what kinds of resources they represent in terms of mental health support and care, and how it connects to the church to some degree. But kind of fortunate in that they're kind of different, varying groups, and they'll describe the programs briefly, and then after that we'll do a Q&A. Before you leave today, please journey to Building 4, just in back here, and visit all the resource tables. So NAMI will be there, Orange County Behavioral Health, different counseling services. SIF will be there, Oak Health. There's a number of different resources that are church connected. So it's interesting to see what's out there and who's out there. As time goes on, we'll do more of that. But we're very fortunate to be able to provide this today. Introducing the speakers today, Paul Liu is representing National Alliance on Mental Illness, Orange County, the FaithNet coordinator. So if you've ever heard of NAMI, a major advocacy group, support group for families of people who are mentally ill, and there's a FaithNet support network, church spiritual connections with that group. It's a great organization, and we need more of it. Tim Lee, who is the Psychiatry Residency Training Director for Yorba Linda Hospital, University Medical Center, and it's a faith-based hospital, and they're training a number of faith-based practitioners in psychiatry, so he'll be here describing the center. Earlier we had Nguyen, who represented CHOP. He's apparently doing the hospital rounds now, so his, one of his second in command, Esther Yang, will be here. She's been off on maternity leave with her third kid. She's been a little busy lately. I'm a high man at CHOP, so she'll be here. And then Christina Ramirez, she'll be here. She's a program manager with County of Orange Healthcare Agency Behavioral Health Services. Just as a part of what we need to know as part of the church, this is where a lot of mental health care is provided, and we need to know how people access that and connect in. So if you folks can start walking up and taking a seat, so we can start the panel. And in the meantime, this whole day will be posted on the internet on the CMDA site. It's called cmda.org/psychiatry. So it'll be in about 2 or 3 weeks. So we'll have all the slides and presentations up there. And please, if you can, give us your email, not for marketing, but for notification of future programs, because we want to have a base of people who are interested and who care about this part of care and ministry. We want to do more and more of these programs in Southern California, and we'd like to have a way to promote that, and if you could be part of that process. You'd either leave your number or your email on the Terraways as a part of the comments in your program, or you can go back to the website, friends.church/events, I believe it is, and not to register, but to say that you're interested, and then we'll track that email and let you know when future things happen. Okay, we'll start out with Tim. Dr. Lee.
Thanks, Tom. So I don't know how many people are from Orange County, LA County, Inland Empire, San Bernardino County. I grew up in Orange County, and it wasn't until I was 25 years old and finishing medical school that I heard about Yorba Linda. So that's out in Inland Empire, northeast of Riverside, if that helps, or if you've ever gone out towards Palm Springs, or about 1 hour west of Palm Springs. At any rate, Yorba Linda University is a graduate program at the university and a full-fledged health center. It's sponsored and overseen by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I myself am not Seventh-day Adventist, I'm Presbyterian, but the university and the health system hires people of all different faiths. But Seventh-day Adventism does come from Christian tradition, and so the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital and Yorba Linda, we have this motto to make man whole and to further the healing and teaching ministry of Jesus Christ. So that's part of what we try to embody and helps kind of distinguish the way that we approach and work with our clients and our patients. We have a full range of services. So we have an inpatient psychiatric hospital with units for children from ages 5 to 13, another unit for adolescents 13 to 17, adults, and then a separate unit as well for geriatric patients. And I will not say what the age limit is on geriatrics because that seems to always change. So that's, and then we also have an addiction recovery unit for people that are wanting to get off of alcohol, prescription pills, other substances that can be dangerous to physically withdraw from without medical support. So that's our inpatient hospital side, and then we also have an outpatient center with a full range of services, again, for all ages. So briefly, kind of next level would be what we call an intensive group therapy or partial hospital program. So we have a variety of tracks within that. For our children and adolescents, we have general tracks. We also have one for eating disorders, substance use, attention deficits, or ADHD issues, children who suffer or have difficulty with self-injurious behavior, another track for children who have issues with chronic health problems and the emotional sequelae that can result from having to struggle with serious health issues. And then we have also a step down, or what we call intensive outpatient program, which is also group therapy with family therapy, which is a few evenings a week. So that the kids can stay in school, and usually the parents are more able to come and attend the separate programming once they get off of work. On the adult side, we also have a number of partial hospital intensive outpatient programs for general issues, for addiction, for people who have addiction as well as comorbid mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. We have also another program for the adults for people who struggle with medical issues, eating disorders, and a new geriatric program as well, you know, for people who are struggling with mental health issues, as well as kind of late life, kind of retirement age transitional issues that can bring up a lot of health concerns and mental health struggles. So that's kind of our middle tier service, and then we have general outpatient services as well. So like weekly individual therapy, which can be also specialized either in DBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. We're trying to recruit some EMDR therapists as well. And then psychiatrists for outpatients, medication management. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a few things, but that's kind of our overarching structure of what we have to offer. So I think Tom gave me a heads up, so I'll pass it.
So I'm Christina. I'm with the healthcare agency with the County of Orange Behavioral Health Services. And when people think about behavioral health services in the county, I think a lot of people think about we're the folks you call the CAT team that goes out and does those 5150s. We have clinicians that ride with police officers or law enforcement, our deputies. We have the clinics, the outpatient clinics. So sometimes people in the community are familiar with those services. But really within behavioral health services, we have over 200 different programs. And what we found is with 200 different programs, we always said there's no wrong door. Well, what we found out is that we have a lot of wrong doors, right? Folks would get to one of our services and find out that they didn't meet criteria or the eligibility for that program. So we created a service called OC Links, and we have a table outside. You'll see a bunch of different flyers and cards for OC Links in the variety of the different threshold languages in Orange County. And the purpose of OC Links is that is your one door to learn about these 200 different programs. So someone can call and say, hey, you know what, I have a juvenile offender in my home and I want to find out, like, where can I get some parenting classes or some type of intervention for my other children, the younger siblings, so that they don't become offenders as well. Did you know there's a program for that? Who knew that, right? That's pretty amazing. There's a program just for that. When we talk about homelessness, it used to be a pretty big topic these days. So we often get the call of someone driving to work on their commute. They say, hey, I've noticed this encampment behind the shopping center. Or every day that I go to my Starbucks, true story, every day that I go to my Starbucks, there's an older gentleman there that is homeless. I'm worried about him and would love for him to get some services. Who knew there's a program for that? We have an outreach team that will go out, try to engage this individual, connect them to services, which may be housing, but hopefully also behavioral health services as well. So there are a variety of different programs out there that people aren't aware of. So we're not just the outpatient clinics or therapy or counseling, but there are different varieties of levels of service. When you think about our services, the way that we're divided, it's among different populations and also age groups. So we have adult and older adult services. So clinics really targeted at working with our older adult or geriatric population, doing intervention services, but also treatment services. We have a program for veteran services. We have a program for children's, or a lot of different programs for children's, whether that's crisis kind of intervention programs, treatment, or prevention and intervention. And then we have what we call our navigation or our system support services. So where we offer trainings in the community, and that might be among our religious leaders or among our professional community. In other words, we have an innovation program right now that is offering mental health training to religious leaders. And that's kind of a new program. We piloted for 3 years. If it's proven to be effective, then it can become a program that's integrated into our system of care. So, when someone calls OC Links, we're open from 8 until 6 p.m. They will be linked to a clinician who is either a social worker or a therapist, and they will help maybe de-escalate the situation, but really offer that active listening to hear about what this caller is looking for. Most of our calls are from care providers or from a family member, so we recognize that, so we can offer support to that family member also. And that might be, in the case of NAMI, it may be just different classes or courses, support groups that they can offer, but then we will also talk to them about the services for the individual they're looking for, and then we warm link them. So we call the provider on the other end. We'll say that, hey, we have this caller and they're looking for this service. We hang up and they're now connected. Then the clinicians ask permission if we can call back in a few days to see how that linkage was made. So we want to ensure that they were able to get to the service, or maybe they found out after they were talking to them, they said, you know what, this really isn't serving my needs. I'm looking for this. So then we can try to start again, redirect them, and then find the service that they're looking for and offer them that ongoing support. One of the other services that we have by calling OC Links is someone can connect to the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs. So again, if I am that parent and I am worried about my adult child who is going through a mental health crisis, and I'm looking for support and I don't know how to navigate the system, and maybe I'm feeling really frustrated, I can call OC Links, be connected with the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs, and they're going to help support me in navigating the system and do some education to let me know what's going on with my family member, to help kind of really work within the system of care and make sure that everybody is getting served. So going back to prevention, crisis, treatment, really looking at the whole system of care and the different levels that are needed.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm very, very glad to be here, having been invited to be here and talk about NAMI and FaithNet. My name is Paul. For most of us at NAMI, NAMI stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness. The majority of us are volunteers. And the reason we volunteer is because someone in our family, maybe a spouse, maybe a child, maybe a sibling, in one way or another is somehow impacted by mental illness. So I will be talking to you from a family member and sharing with you, number one, what we do at NAMI and why we do what we do. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what is FaithNet and why I'm involved in FaithNet. So NAMI is a national organization. We have facilities or affiliations throughout all of the states in the United States, and we have a affiliate here in Orange County. What are some of the things that NAMI does? One thing that's most important to me is training. There's a variety of training that we offer. One is called Family to Family, and this is training where we offer to family members, whether it's a spouse, parents, siblings, what have you. And it's a training that's actually taught by a family member. So it's a family member teaching other family members. And my wife and I, we took that class about 3 years ago. It literally changed our lives. How we behaved, how we understood the sickness, how we understood mental illness, and how we can not only help our child, but how can we actually cope with this mental illness and make some sense of it so that we can actually have some sense of we know what we should be doing, and going forward, what is the future looking like for our child and also for us. So it was a life-changing experience, and ever since then, my wife and I have been volunteering just about every chance we have. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be here to share this with you. Some of the other programs we offer at NAMI, the next one is called Peer to Peer, and this is someone that's actually in recovery, someone that is recovered from their mental illness, and now that individual is now training or teaching other peers. So again, it's a very, very powerful program that we offer where someone that's in recovery is actually now sharing with others that are actually having a mental illness. Some of the other programs we have another one that's called Basic, and that is for parents that has young children that may have mental illness. And it's very important that we focus on that, and I think Esther's going to talk more about that and some of the wonderful things that's being done here in Orange County. In addition to that, we have some other programs that I think is very worthwhile. There's one that's called In Your Own Voice, and that is a peer that actually would come to a venue like this and share their stories, share their lived experiences of what it's like to have a mental illness and how they recovered and what their life is like now. And the last one I'm going to talk about is called Ending the Silence. And this one here I think is also very powerful. And this one is actually designed to go to high school age children and lower. And it's meant to go and talk to them about some of the issues that they may be dealing with. Maybe a classmate that says, you know, I'm not feeling good about this. I think something's not right, but I don't know what it is. And I think I'm going to do something very silly. But please don't tell anybody, because, you know, we have the secret handshake, right? I can share with you, but don't tell anybody. Well, you know what? Maybe there's times when you have to break that bond and say, you know what, because I love you, you're my buddy, you're my friend, I'm going to go and tell someone. Right? Ending the silence is an approach that we have. It's actually a 1-hour program that we do, because we know, high schoolers and below, they're very likely, about an hour is all you have. Right? So in that time frame, we actually encourage them. You know what? You may have to kind of deal with these types of situations. And don't be afraid to stand up for your friend and talk about these things. So those are the kind of things that we do at NAMI that I think would be applicable to many of the people that are here. I want to talk a little bit about FaithNet. FaithNet is our faith-based arm that reaches out to faith organizations of all faith to talk about mental illness. Now, FaithNet started in Orange County, of all places, about 15, 20 years ago. Okay, and it all started with someone saying, you know what, faith is important to me, and when I'm dealing with issues like mental illness, right, I want to be able to reach out to my faith organization, and I want to be able to incorporate the faith message. and actually embrace, right, what God is doing and how God can be a part of it. So that initiative started, like I say, in Orange County some time ago. And when my wife and I started to volunteer, I kind of saw this little brochure that says faithfulness. They say, hey, what is this? Because when they explained it, I said, you know what, I think I'm interested in doing this. They said, you are? I said, yeah, I think I want to do this. They'll say, it's yours. So about 3 years ago, I wound up becoming, quote unquote, what you now hear people say, I'm the FaithNet person. And my role as a volunteer is actually to go out to various faith organizations to talk about the importance of faith and mental illness. And when I first started doing this, it was, I got a lot of, I think what kind of, Pastor Chris talked about was, well, in our church we pray a lot, and we're going to be good, and this is going to be okay. And I kept saying, well, there may be some other things that we can do, but you know what, thank you very much, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing. So at first I was like, wow, so I'm not sure I can do this. But then I kept praying about it. I said, you know what, maybe there are things that can happen. So as I continue to go through the various faith organizations, I think God is working in all of us. And in all of us. And the next thing you know, now I'm getting people contacting me saying, can you come and talk to us about mental illness at our church? Can you come and describe the different things that NAMI is doing? And is there a way for us to somehow be involved? And what should we do? And what should be the response from our faith organization? And when I say faith organizations, I go to lots of churches. I'm a Christian. I go to a lot of churches. But I'm also going to synagogues, and I'm also going to mosques, which is wonderful. So praise the Lord for that. And again, hopefully, we're going to continue to work on growing our footprint, if you will, in faith organizations, and continue to kind of reach out and I think, Tom talked about different languages and, how important it is that we understand that we may be all trying to solve the same problem or looking at the same issues, and we may have some very common things that we're trying to solve. So thank you very much for your time.
Hello, it is such an honor to be here. I was just struck by the interconnectedness of everything because I went to medical school in Yorba Linda and really enjoyed my medical education there. I did my residency and fellowship at UCI and worked a lot with the county programs and still do at CHOP as well. And while I was doing my residency, I did run some NAMI groups during residency and saw how important NAMI was as well. And I realized, wow, it's a really small community, and what an honor it is to be able to speak with you all. When I was in residency and fellowship, I had a grant through the government to raise awareness about mental health issues in churches. The grant was specifically towards the minority churches, but it was really towards all churches because there is such a stigma in our religious communities about mental health. My dad's a pastor. I'm a PK, and we still don't talk about depression or anxiety or any of those mental health issues in our families because, you're just supposed to have it all together. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist at CHOP. We have a lot of wonderful programs there. Mental health programs are really exploding at CHOP right now. When we look at intensity, the most intense program they can do is an inpatient hospitalization, and we just opened up our inpatient unit in May, and they have been very, very busy since we opened. Below that is a partial. We don't have a partial yet at CHOP, but I heard that that's in the works right now. We do have an intensive outpatient program for children. So our inpatient program is actually for kids between the ages of 3 and 17. Our intensive outpatient program are adolescents between the ages of 12 to 17.
And just as Dr. Lee mentioned, those are kids who are going through anxiety, depression, other relational issues who need a little bit more intense than just once a week therapy. And they have groups, parents are involved, it's 3 times a week, it's several hours. It is a commitment. You have to commit to it for about 6 to 8 weeks, but for most patients who go through it, it does seem like it's worth it. Our IOP program at CHOC is DBT based, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. There are not a lot of DBT IOP programs out there, so I think that this one is really based upon mindfulness and being aware of yourself, and the kids have really benefited from it. We do have a very large psychology program at CHOC as well. We have, I was told, at least 18. We don't know the exact number because they are constantly growing, but at least 18 psychologists. We have neuropsychologists as well if your child needs some neuropsychology testing. So those are kids who are struggling with learning issues at school, like ADHD or other learning issues. So you get testing done. All those schools, all the public schools out there do offer testing. You can ask for it through an IEP, but if you feel like you need outside testing, you can go to a neuropsychologist out in the community as well. We also do a couple things for the county. I am in the co-occurring clinic, which means that we are a county contracted clinic, and we only see kids who have a co-occurring medical condition, which can be anything like asthma, diabetes, or something more serious like a genetic disorder or cancer, as well as a co-occurring mental health condition. We also have an FSP, which is a full-service partnership also through the county for the same population of kiddos with a co-occurring mental health and medical condition, but they have practitioners that will actually go into the house and work with parents and do cooking classes and things like that, and really just solidify these things for kids. When I talk with churches, I like to talk about how you can get services for your family. It's really, really scary when you need somebody, and we often wait until the last minute before we call or try to find someone. And by that time, the wait list for most therapists and psychiatrists is about 3 months. And you don't know if your insurance is contracted, what is in-network being out-of-network. So generally, we just, I advise families to go through your insurance and ask for a list. Every insurance is obligated to give you a list of all therapists and psychiatrists that are contracted through them. When you do that, you will realize that about 25% of that list is not accurate, that they either are not contracted anymore, or they're retired. So just be prepared to call at least 10 to 15 people before you find somebody who's willing to see you in about 2 to 3 months. It can be kind of disheartening, but if you are persistent, I have seen almost everybody find somebody that is pretty good and that they like. Inpatient psychiatric hospitalization are for those who are imminently in danger to themselves or to other people. If your kiddo is not quite at that place, but you feel like they need something more than once-a-week therapy, then we would recommend partial hospitalization program. Partial is a little bit more intense than IOP. It's every day. They go there instead of going to school, and usually they'll work with the school to do homework assignments there. And if that is a little bit too intense for you and you're looking more of like an after-school thing, then there is the IOP, which is intensive outpatient program. I think that's it. That's all the programs we have at CHOC, I believe.
Thank you all.
Please visit the resource tables, because all of these folks will be there, ready to talk with you folks and provide resources. I'm going to call next some of the earlier speakers, Kevin and Bob and Kent as well, and Ted. And we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. In the meantime, some of you asked about the book Pastor Chris Ward offered, and they went fast. So he is willing to find more books for you folks. The name of the book is God is My Architect by John Hurley, H-U-R-L-E-Y. And if you want some books through Chris, just leave your number and your request on one of those tearaway sheets and leave them up here, or use one of the 3x5 cards, and we'll get back to you and he'll try to get some more books. Okay, we will proceed to, and apologize that it is only about a 50-minute session, and we have tons of questions, so we won't get to them all, and we might take a lot more time on one than others, but we'll all chime in, so hopefully the ones we do get to will be helpful. We'll start over.
Check. There we go. All right. The first question I'm going to go through really quick is one was when calling Kaiser to make an appointment with a psychiatrist, can you just ask what doctors are Christians? No, you can't, because they don't really have a list of the doctors who necessarily are Christians. There's a few things that I could recommend. One, all the doctors have bios online, and they might identify through that. I know I did on my bio. I talked about actually myself attending friends and things I was passionate about here at this church. And I will mention a few names of psychiatrists. They'll probably kick me for mentioning their names, but at the Euclid Clinic, there's Dr. Jay Lee. He's a Christian. He's actually even done some missionary work. Dr. Nancy Dawn, she's a graduate from UC Irvine. I actually went to medical school with her. And then Dr. Rob Sato. So that was just at the outpatient over at Euclid. And so it's almost about half of us. And I would imagine there's quite a few Christian psychiatrists too at the other clinics. That's probably the best recommendation I can give you for that.
One of them was in the Bible, it says, put others before yourself. But how can I also take care of myself and do what the Lord has commanded? You know, the scripture is never one verse committed or pitted against the other verse. And in Matthew 22, it talks about you love God with all your heart, mind, soul first, and we're to love our neighbors. If it stopped right there, we'd have a problem. But we're to love our neighbors as ourselves. So if I want you to have something, I should want it for me. And if I make it happen for you, but deny it for myself, I am in violation of Scripture. So if I want you to be well rested, I should be well rested. If I want you to be happy, I should do the same thing I would counsel you to do. So in Scriptures, never one verse supersedes another. We are to put others first. But we should want what we want for them.
Some of the questions I have, by the way, there are almost so many variables in this. I'm not sure I can really answer the question thoroughly, but I'll try to answer it generically, and then hopefully it'll respond to some of this. As a spouse, how do you walk through mental illness when you are not at appointments? How can you be an advocate when you are not sure if your spouse is not opening up at all to what is going on? So maybe just a couple of thoughts on this. Some people are really very, they really want to hold on very tightly to the privacy of therapy. And so it's not uncommon for spouses or kids or whatever to really not want to talk about their session, which is difficult for you if you're the spouse, because you want to be able to help, or you want to at least know enough about what's going on, and you can't get any information out of them, and that's just a natural frustration. Some of that might be unresolvable depending on if the spouse just really does not want to include you. There's not a ton you can do with this. This is always a little tricky because the therapist would really have to let the spouse know that you did this. But if there's some concerns going on that you feel like are either intensely problematic or dangerous or whatnot, you can call the therapist and leave a message for them. That therapist won't be able to call you back, won't be able to really talk with you, won't even really be able to acknowledge much at all unless they have a release to talk with you. But you can let them know if there's something going on. The therapist may or may not talk about that with your spouse. They probably for sure will let them know that you called, though. So be prepared for a little blowback if that's something that's not welcome. The other thing I would just suggest is kind of attempting to kind of put your frustration about them a little bit on the side and really talk with them about what they need from you, how you can be as supportive as possible without being intrusive in your therapy, and see how they respond to that. Everyone's a little different, but that's just a couple of thoughts.
I like the same thing goes for physicians' offices too. Sometimes there's a prohibition against allowing anybody into the doctor-patient relationship, but I always tell my patients, fax or send a hard copy of your point, your part of the story, your perspective, and that usually will go into the chart. And if it's in the chart, the doctor's responsible for that piece of information, either validating it or having it entered into part of the history, or asking about it and having it be invalidated. But at least you had your way of entry into the process. So yeah, technology can be helpful. How can spiritual leaders speak to an advocate for medical treatment for depression when insurance companies either deny or limit the amount and quality of treatment provided to the individual? So anybody else want to add something, chime in? Access to care is a major issue in mental health care now. We each are part of a piece of the delivery system of care. Part of today is to expand access to care because the church, we believe anyway, that the church has a vast resource to help with restoring mental health. And so Bob's been doing it for almost 20 years. There are pieces of this that hasn't been explored yet. Psychiatry, the American Psychiatric Association, this is part of the agenda. How do we get people into care when we don't have enough caregivers? The system is broken. There aren't enough beds. There aren't enough providers. There aren't enough resources through insurance. And we don't have enough psychiatrists. We will never have enough psychiatrists. How's that for depressing? So there are new models of, well, what does a psychiatrist do now? How can we extend specialty care? Do we train primary care physicians? Do we train the PAs? Do we train NPs? Do we get more Stevens ministers? Do we get more lay counselors or peer counselors out of churches? So the more support from the bottom up we can get, the more people can get help quicker, earlier, and then those who need more care can filter up and get care at those levels, and maybe the system will be less impacted. But I think Kaiser is probably the biggest system trying to do it, and mental health care in Kaiser is like we were talking earlier, a lot of wait lists are kind of long, and there's not enough psychiatrists, so there's still recruitment going on. And even if you offer really good jobs with really good pay, it's hard to find good ones. So we share your pain. We're trying to figure out ways to do it. I work on the Orange County Psychiatric Society. They have an access to care committee. It's part of the American Psychiatric Association. And there are just lots of hurdles of how to try to change the system and expand it. There are hospital groups, there are nurses groups, there are people lobbying for their piece of the action, and it's sort of not necessarily based on what's best for patients. So, hopefully, the church will become a big part of this, and we can help with that.
All right, shift gears a bit. Someone commits suicide, does that mean they won't go to heaven? I think the basic answer to that is that's a fallacy. Most anyone astute in Scripture at all would say there's nothing in Scripture at all that speaks to that whatsoever. And in fact, if you're going to wrestle down the whole issue of grace, you have to agree that there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. So I think the other thing that plays into this is when someone makes that decision, there's a lot of factors that are going on that are misfiring in the brain. And I would not embrace the faith of Christianity if I didn't believe that there was a God like the Jesus that Chris was talking about earlier, who weeps for the young person or the older person who decided to end it tragically that way. So there's nothing that speaks against that. In fact, there's a lot that speaks for the fact that if someone was a believer, then they will be in heaven regardless of how their end came to be. So the tough thing is that we have to wrestle with that here. When someone has made that decision, end of life has happened. So whatever's the end result of that theologically or spiritually, that is over. The rest of it's for us to wrestle with here. And I think the bigger issue is not to condone that like you can take your life and still go to heaven, but to really be engaged with people on what is triggering that desire to end it all and help folks step toward it. You heard some great resources for that, to step toward the people who are talking about it, to get to the root cause as to why they're even wanting to do it in the first place, as to whether or not it's okay to do it. There's a different frame of reference on that, right? So we want to, as much as we can, step toward the folks and try to help them see that there's a greater purpose in life, a greater meaning in life, that God has a plan, and an end that's very different than what they're thinking about at that time. And so whatever can help in that process, we want to move in that direction.
Carly, come on.
Yeah, Carly, no, I don't have anything to add to that. I totally agree. Carly. One of the questions I have right now is what's the difference between depression and mania? Would a manic always be depressed? Mania and depression, they're definitely two distinct mood states. So the symptoms of mania are usually highly energetic, they're sleeping only a few hours nightly. Their rate of speech can be very difficult to even interject questions. They can have variable degrees of what we call grandiosity to, they're going to come up with the latest, greatest inventions who I've even heard on the second coming. A very, very distinct mood state that usually lasts for, maybe 5-7 days, even longer. And they often do have depression. In fact, probably patients who have a particular bipolar type 2 generally are in more of a state of depression. The difference between those two mood disorders is patients with bipolar 2, they don't really have distinct mania that's as impairing when they end up going to a psychiatric hospital. But generally their mood elevations are a little bit more subtle. In fact, probably some of the most creative and intelligent people that we interact with in our community who benefit from their inventions are probably individuals who have that disorder. But the distinction is very important for the treatment. It can be hard because they're usually coming into our office when they're depressed, not necessarily when they're sleeping only a few hours coming in with the latest invention. But the treatment's drastically different. And unfortunately, bipolar 2 patients generally more depressed. Patients with bipolar disorder have to be on what we call mood stabilizers. So you definitely want to have them on one of those medications, the lithium. There's various class of anticonvulsants. Depakote, Lamictal. That was actually one of the questions, what actually is Lamictal? It's a medication that's indicated for bipolar depression. And then there are also the medications, atypical antipsychotics that we also use for bipolar disorder. Medications like Zyprexa, Abilify, the two of those, one of the newer medications. So that's the distinction between the two. They generally do have both, and sometimes more often in the states of depression.
I'll add a little bit of a section, since this is a lot of what I do too. There's a new category in the past 2 or 3 years called depression with mixed features. Over the years, we've known about something called mixed depressions, or subtle bipolar disorders, and sometimes depression that doesn't get better from antidepressants are actually depressions with mixed features, which are not necessarily bipolar disorder, but there's a little bit of symptom similarity that is like bipolar disease. Some people will have a little bit of racing thoughts, a little bit of fast speech, a little bit of irritability, and high anxiety and high energy, and that will qualify as a mixed feature, which makes antidepressants by themselves not adequate, and sometimes adding a mood stabilizer can actually make things better. So it's not bipolar, it's not mania, but it's a little bit of instability, and that's a whole new field breaking out now about people's depressions when they don't get better. There's maybe other things we're not seeing that we will start working on in the next couple of years.
What's the difference between depression and anxiety? Anxiety, if you've never had it, think of the word fear. If you're fearful of a snake and someone were to throw a snake on you, you'd go running out. Anxiety is the same feeling, but without the stimuli. They just have that same sense of, and it can go all the way to the point of a panic attack. Depression is blunted, it's loss of. It's the kind of blunting of what would be enjoyable, in life. And the treatments can be through medication, and it can be through psychotherapy, because you can learn a lot of times how to recapture life, or like with the anxiety, you have put yourself in such a predicament that it starts building up and your anxiety goes up. So it's environmentally caused, but the feelings are real. The causes, there can be such, there's no specific cause. It's just the neurotransmitters get out of whack. And if we always look for a cause, I don't think that's fair to the patient sometimes, because oftentimes it's just the neurotransmitters are out of balance. We don't know why. They go to a doctor who understands that. They can play with the medication, get them back in balance. Typically for depression, about a year on medication. You can think possibly coming off the medication, but that's a doctor's call. Because I'm smart enough to know I shouldn't talk about medications. I should leave that to the medical.
I might just comment on that too. Experientially, I've always found that it seems like anxiety and depression, anyone else's thoughts on this too, it seems like anxiety and depression are almost always sort of flip sides of the same coin. They run in pairs, and where one might be pushing through, so maybe the depression is pushing through, it seems like once you kind of get a handle on depression, then the anxiety kind of tends to flare out a bit, or vice versa. And so I almost see them, if I hear one set of symptoms, I'm usually thinking, at least in the back of my mind, probably a little later, this other one's going to kind of perk up too. So I don't know, but it's just.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, they're usually comorbid. Things don't often just isolate into little categories of depression or anxiety. They're very common. And sometimes though you can even tease out to where maybe there's a bit more of the baseline anxiety disorder, also puts higher risk for depression. If I'm seeing someone with depression, I take a bit of history in the past, whether I can diagnose things like panic disorder or social anxiety disorder. But yeah, they're generally always hand in hand. They're not, I don't generally see them being exclusively by themselves.
If you look at the theories, brain-wise, and where they both originate from, okay, they both have to do with serotonin and norepinephrine, so the same medicines are used for both, which is kind of confusing and means that we need better theories, basically.
I really only responded to that because I wanted to avoid this question. We could talk about that for 33 minutes. No, I'm joking. Anyway, the question is, what can I do when I take my daughter to therapy and she refuses to get out of the car? She's 12 years old. You just take her by the ear. No, I'm joking. This depends on so many factors, right? It depends on Why is she actually going to therapy? What are the feelings about therapy? Is she afraid to go in? Is she angry at you for taking her? Has she had previous experiences with a therapist that were unpleasant, and she's sort of just struggling with the relationship issue? Are they just angry at you and they want to, get a pound of flesh out of you by refusing to go in for the therapy? I think there are a number of reasons for this, but my general impression is if you get angry at them, you're not going to be helpful. And so somehow or another, there needs to be enough space in the relationship, enough room in the relationship, that at least you get a good understanding of what's going on. If there was a period of time many moons ago when I had someone come in to see me who was an adolescent, never took his sunglasses off for a number of weeks and refused to speak with me. Now, he at least came in, but it was an interesting sort of process. And eventually he started to speak, but he was a really angry kid. And this kid had a lot of pent-up hostility, so it just took some time to for him to feel safe enough that he was willing to kind of speak at all. The other thing I would probably suggest is you go in and meet with a therapist. And if this is the first appointment, then the daughter's unwilling to get out of the car. In the end, you can't pick them up and haul them in, more than likely, unless there's danger to themselves or something. But you may just go in and explain the situation to the therapist and strategize with the therapist about how you're going to assist this kid in further treatment.
I often tell parents, tell a child 3 times, and if it's child's dangerous to themselves, then you can't give them this option, but 3 times you go in and have this therapist to yourself to talk to. And if at the end of that, you really tell me that there's nothing good in this, then I'll tell you you don't have to go. Most of the time, not the kid you just described, but often that child will find out that, or that teen, that they have somebody to actually talk to that listens to them and they want to go back. So that's an option too, depending on the circumstance. But yeah, obviously you want to get them. I took my 14-year-old daughter one time to a therapist. She refused to get out of the car. The therapist came out to the car, and then she made me feel like a horrible mother. She said, never in my entire practice, and I've been practicing for 30 years, have I had a child refuse to get out of the car. Your daughter must be on drugs. And I was like, ooh, that was not a pleasant experience. I could not get her out, and I didn't even know my daughter, but I'm thinking, really, in 30 years, never? That can't be. So it does happen, right? Yes. Okay, so that isn't the way a therapist should respond to you, by the way. That was not good for me. I still remember it, it's been a long time. Yeah. Okay, this one says, when I or someone in my family suffers from a nervous breakdown, mental or brain disorder, where and who can I go to better help and support them? And yeah, we hope, well, first of all, define a nervous breakdown. That's an old term. I don't even know that we use that anymore, do we really? I would think that that's just a mental health crisis, is what would be. Somebody just kind of either completely flips out, or if it's a psychotic break, or can't get out of bed and refuses to move. Any of those could really be a way of describing that. But you've got options. There's NAMI has a warm line that you can call 24/7. They've got their number in the room over here in the resource room, where you can talk to somebody at any time if it is obviously somebody who's potentially suicidal. There's, you can call 911, they send out a CAT team that will evaluate. If you need, the Orange County Mental Health also has a table over in the other room that has resources that are free. There's a line you can call. There are obviously psychiatrists. Can't get into your psychiatrist right away, you go to your regular doctor. NAMI can direct you. NAMI has classes. My classes are helpful to people who are struggling with a loved one with a mental illness, because it's a way to figure out, there's always that question. The biggest question I get with people in my classes is, okay, so I have a loved one struggling with a mental illness, but at what point do I excuse not acceptable behavior, and at what point do I hold this person accountable? How do I set up a boundary with somebody who I've been told has a mental illness? And let me tell you, having worked with that as a therapist standpoint, and as a mother, because I have a daughter who struggles with mental illness, pretty severe, it is a fine line. And there are principles that you work with, that I teach, that you use to guide you, and it is just a movement back and forth between not over discouraging that person with boundaries and requirements that are so excessive that that person is so discouraged that they won't try and that they can't meet them. On the other hand, giving them the responsibility to do everything that they can do and a little bit more to kind of push them, and then yet being supportive. And there are all kinds of things that you have to look at in order to figure out how to walk that line. But if you have a family member who's going through difficulty, you could ask that person if it's okay for you to sit in on the psychiatrist meetings. Not necessarily therapist meetings, but sometimes therapists will bring you in and help you figure out how to be supportive with a loved one. You can do different things like that. So there's all kinds of ways that you can support a loved one who's struggling with mental illness, and also support for yourself, because NAMI has groups for caregivers of people who struggle with mental illness, because it is a lot, takes a lot out of you too, to also be able to do that. But there are answers, there is support, there's really a lot out there. I hope today has given you encouragement and hope to know that resources are available, and they're available even if you don't have the finances for them at the county level. So, okay, that's it.
On a different note, as a nurse working in endoscopy, we're required to ask anxiety, depression, and about anxiety and depression, and if indicated suicidal screening. We follow protocol to give out info sheets and notify our MDs to refer to the primary care doctors. It's inconsistent, and wondering if you have suggestions for how to help people outside of the church. Seems the mental health system is broken, having many gaps. That is an accurate perception. When the World Health Organization did this study about 20 years ago and found that 6 out of the top 10 major disability causes in the world were mental health concerns, they had 20 years to sort of help get the countries ready for this crisis and plan ahead. Well, it's beyond 20 years and we're not prepared, and the systems are overwhelmed. And it is not a popular thing to deal with in government resources systems, but it's like the county, Kaiser, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all the insurances, all the clinics are having to incorporate the model of how do you care for everybody who has mental health issues, and it's so huge. It's this cultural thing. It's like, if you really are open to taking care of people, how do you do that? Because all of the money is going to other things like certain plastic surgeries or this or that. A lot of procedures that are elective. If you're doing that but not covering the basics of severe depression, well, what kind of a social system is this? And it's very clearly broken, and that's where some of the bills will come through for advocacy. NAMI is a major advocacy group, so for faith-based people or not, it is in there with legislative people. There's a number of people who have come out advocating for mental health care. Not a lot of legislators, because it's not popular, because it's so expensive. And the people who are needing it most have no power. And so anything that we can do who are able to support or help or promote advocacy, we should be doing. So if you want to support certain people who are with mental health care support and developing more services, great. NAMI is a great advocacy group, and we're trying to partner more and more with NAMI because legislators kind of listen to them now. So the system is broken, and hopefully we can do more with the church and advocate in our governments to do something productive and support what we need to get. Can I add to that?
Quickly too. One of my thoughts about that is the systems are often broken and there aren't enough resources. And I really do understand if you're broke, right? I mean, I get that. But what strikes me sometimes is that there are people who they're not broke, they're not wealthy, but they're not broke. And if you can't get the care you need through your insurance, you need to elevate your need for care above whether your insurance company is going to pay for it or not. And there are tons of us that are willing to buy a car and make payments on that car. And I think there are some times when you're going to need to step outside of whatever the system you're in and just take a look and see if there are resources available to you that are either within your budget or are within organizations that maybe help offset some of the costs of therapy or of treatment. And I guess I just don't want you, I find this with people all the time, where they have insurance, and I think there's like a blocking side where they just feel like, well, if the insurance doesn't cover it, then I'm not going to do it. And that's just a mental block. That's not a reality block. And sometimes there are systems that you may get quicker access to that may help relieve the suffering while you're waiting in the queue, maybe to get the care from the insurance company that you ultimately will get. But maybe you don't want to wait 3 months to do that. You need it now. And so I guess I just encourage you to kind of consider that at least.
I don't know what the order is, but jump out there a bit. That's good. I have a question that I think is a good one for all of us, because the question is, having not suffered from depression, how can I be more supportive to friends and loved ones around me? I think there's two things in that. One, if you haven't, praise the Lord. That's a gracious place to be. Even if you have, it doesn't put you in a place of saying to someone, oh, I know exactly how you feel, because you don't. I think that's true across the board. We just need to be careful that we too quickly step into the I can empathize with you because I've gone through it, because every person goes through things differently. There may be some patterns here, but the person that you're meeting is going through one level of it or one frame of it, and your experience feels like it's similar. We just need to be careful that we don't step too far into that saying, I know how you feel. I think it can give us great empathy, but I think we still would be best to come from a place of learning where they're at by listening more, asking more questions, caring very, very much about where they're at. And then I thought this question may have come before some of the other sessions, but then Bob covered a lot of that in just talking about being in that position of lay ministry. That's all of us in a certain regard when it comes to working with things that are outside our realm, and understanding where my pay grade is and where it's not, and understanding what I can step toward and help with, and what I need to help them move to someone who can get help. I think just coming here to be resourced, to be able to say, okay, I don't know what to do with this, but I know who to call. So I'm going to make a phone call, and you and I are going to go talk to someone. I think that's the way to step alongside some people and care for them. And then I want to add a piece to that, to a different question. I was talking about the spiritual aspect of this. Someone said, how do you differentiate between mental illness and demonic possession? I don't even want to touch that, but I want to speak to it from this standpoint. I think we do a disservice to both sides when we over or under spiritualize things that are happening. It's too easy to jump in and say, well, this is all demonic, and then that shuts out all the community that may have resources that can be very helpful. And it's also easy to just say, well, this is just all neurological. I think everything is spiritual, and everything is physical. And somehow in the middle of that, God has bridged the gap by bringing divine down into human form. And so when we're wrestling with things, I think we need to not shut out either side. We need to be open to what the community has learned, that God has gifted us with brains that can figure some things out. Some of the brains up here are better than mine, maybe all of them. But we all have a certain level at which we have been given abilities, and some, by God's grace, have been given incredible understanding of the human mind. To not avail ourselves of that would be foolish. At the same time, to neglect prayer as a primary means of influence on the circumstances around us would be foolishness as well. So I think we just need to come into that middle space where we say, I'm going to pursue what resources are there. I'm going to pray that God will give me wisdom. I'm going to pray fervently for this person, that they would be delivered from this thing. And I think that's especially true, because one of the areas that also is interesting, kind of coming through more maybe a little bit, is when your son or daughter is going through something. Which is a personal touch for me. That's hard. And if you're a parent here and you're here because of that, I identify with that side of it. And that's a very painful place to be. Trying to figure out what to do, how to step in when they don't want help, and they're sitting in their car refusing to go in. Those are just really awful places to be. I think the parent of adult children, the parent of adolescents who are going through hard times, to be on our knees regularly for that God's grace would be in that God would bring the right influences into their lives, that God would open doors of communication, all of that has got to be our daily prayer for them. And then as well as that, Lord, how do you want me to proceed? Bring the right resources, show me what direction, what 800 number should I be calling? I don't think there's anything you can't be praying about. But as we move forward into that, I think we bring in both pieces. Part of being here today is to say, how can the church come alongside the science and say, hey, there's both to be gained in this, and I think God can be glorified in the blend of those things, because he's gifted and ways to figure things out, and he's offered his Spirit to come alongside us.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're all excited about with this conference is really inviting this part more into the church. I can tell you what it is extremely heartbreaking for when I'm treating some of my patients is when people are saying, just get off your medications, that you have a faith issue. And it's so damaging to their spirit, and I just, it's, I don't know if it infuriates or it really does upset me, because I really think we should not be isolated from each other, that we should be integrated. I love our church for that very reason. I've actually told some of our patients, well, if you're going to your church and they're doing that, my church isn't doing it. So getting some recruiting from the office. So anyway, can you talk more about the connection between inflammation in the brain and depression? What treatments are available, medicinal or otherwise, foods to avoid? Really kind of the discussion about inflammation in the brain and treatments is really not isolated to just depression, and it's becoming kind of a, kind of a hot topic. We see it in schizophrenia, we see a lot of other illnesses. And bringing that up is more on the grounds of kind of opening up new paradigms for treatments. Like I was talking about earlier, the treatments that we have roughly been the same for a long time, but what's interesting is actually the treatments that we do have actually do help reduce inflammation in the brain. So when you read up on it, it talks about different cytokines, all those inflammatory factors, but this delayed effect that you're seeing with antidepressants. Another big topic in neuroscience is neurogenesis. For many years we thought that the brain did not have the ability to produce new neurons. That's not true. It actually can. Guess what antidepressants do? They can actually increase neurogenesis. We also know about neuroplasticity, where actually new neurons can actually heal and connect themselves. Guess what antidepressants can do? They can do neuroplasticity, they can reduce brain inflammation. So it really, even touches upon too what Chris was talking about the brain being the most complex organ. It's growing and growing, and we see that there's a lot of treatments that we do have are doing these things, but we want better. I would tell you as a clinician, it's painful to be treating someone with depression and it's saying it's going to take weeks. I think every mental health professional wants something right there to where they can walk out of the office within a few days. We should be able to do that. We do that with other conditions. I understand it's more complex, but hopefully with some of the things I was talking about, we'll have some novel treatments within the next few years. Also, lastly, sorry, foods. Really our only source of antioxidants are through food. We don't generate them ourselves, and usually the Western diet is is pretty bad. So the one way very easily to point out foods that are rich in antioxidants are colors. You know, are they green leafy vegetables? Are they blueberries? Are they strawberries? Also, our brain is composed of a lot of fat. So there's healthy fats through avocados, through fish. Also, some people do supplements like omega-3, omega-6. There's actually been some studies that can help some mood symptoms too. They've done research on that. So.
This conference has done a great job integrating the language of mental health and Christian theology. Could the panel speak to the area of the internal tension and actual difference between the two disciplines? Are these differences at the level of presuppositional theory-laden pre-commitments between secular psychology, psychiatry versus Christianity? This is something, it goes back, if most of you are old enough to have heard your pastor from the pulpit make a joke about an antidepressant Prozac. They have made fun of Christianity. This goes back to Albert Ellis, who had such a disdain for the Christian church. And it was a disdain well earned, because we did literally nothing to help people. If a woman came to see her pastor who was being abused, he would tell her, pray for him and try not to make him mad. And it's only recently that we've begun taking seriously the role from the church to help people. Now, in history, after Albert Ellis, the church started fighting back. You know, because we would make fun of Christianity, and we still hear the echo of that kind of conflict. Just get over it, pray about it, let it go. And it's a medical condition, and the church needs to recognize when we talk about mental illness, but there's a lot of behavioral stuff that the church has neglected, and we're starting now to literally get involved in it. And we've got good schools who are raising up pastors who in the next generation, I think, will do a great job of reaching out and trying to actually care for the people. So when the church says we care, we actually do care. So the tension that still exists is theology wants psychiatry. We want to have how they come about their conclusions to fit our theology. We don't do that to gastrologists, we don't do that to cardiologists, but we do expect that from psychiatry. And I don't think it's fair, it's not logical. So the tension is created in the sense that I come to my church to learn how to live. I come to my church to learn how to live the practical theology. I go to my doctor that gives me the best chance to think clearly, so when I come to the church, I can respond to the message and challenge that the church has set forth. And I would ask our doctors to respond to your question.
Yeah, I mean, it touches upon a little bit what I was mentioning of to isolate mental health as an entirely different category from the other areas of medicine. I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I was talking about doing some neuroscience research in the past, like with Alzheimer's. A lot of other brain diseases, we look at and we don't do that with mental illness, and it shouldn't be like that. I think that is changing. I think it definitely changes when we have, pastors who are open about it. I mean, I love Matthew and Chris for the fact that they've been open and transparent talking about their things. I think it saves and helps so many people when they do that. We're not going to heal if we just stay quiet. And I mean, frankly, some of the people who I admire, their faith, their connection with Christ, they're struggling with anxiety and depression. And to me, they're inspirations in faith, to me, and even more so for their acknowledgement of it being a health condition that they're getting treatment for.
And the part about presuppositions, I think psychoanalysis is still in process, and there's theories that are not developed fully yet. But when I was talking about Leon earlier, he was always battling against the idea that he was talking about God and religion, and oh no, I'm not a Christian, although there's a biographer saying, yeah, he did give himself to the faith when he was a teenager. But he also had a mood disorder, I think, and it was very difficult for him to battle his trauma from boarding school and other places, kind of a religious bullying kind of experience. But his theory goes beyond Melanie Klein and object relations, which John Townsend and Cloud kind of do object relations, which is very consistent with Christian theology. But Melanie Klein stops at something called the depressive position, kind of like Ecclesiastes, where it's all meaningless, but it's under the sun. Beyond goes beyond and says there's a non-verbal connection to something bigger than we can think about. And it's very much the same language that the Desert Fathers used in the mystics right after Christ. So I think that's very consistent with the presuppositions of Christian theology and redemption. It just hasn't been developed yet. The Holy Spirit has been along with us in mental health care since it began.
So, it's not fair, and it's been around. That's what we need to understand, and that's what we need to make sure people understand. It's not fair to detach their faith from their medical condition, thinking their faith should fix it. And we've been facing this since the Garden of Eden. That woman.
You get the last question.
Let me add one thought in there, just so you're aware. Greg Abbas at Eastside has got a monthly gathering of the care pastors in the area and any other care organizations in the area that want to come. So once a month we gather just to talk about this whole area. And one of the beautiful things about that is for every church who comes to that to just acknowledge we can't do everything, but we need to be educated so that when someone comes for help, we know where to direct them. And to not be afraid to say, you know what, we don't have that here, but Eastside does. Or we don't have that here, but let me send you down to Crossroads. So that it doesn't depend on the location, it depends on the help. And so we're just trying to help each other be educated on what the resources are out there, and this is a piece of that. So.
We were just having a
Nobody
conversation here.
to me.
Sorry.
Okay.
We were deciding to get the last question. So, I'm actually very optimistic, though. I have to tell you, one of the only benefits of getting older is that it seems to add some perspective. And I don't think this would have happened 10 or 20 years ago. And I'm very optimistic that we're actually, this is great. I mean, not because I'm you guys. I mean, this is great that this conversation is happening, and you guys are all here, and I'm super enthused. So, the last question, probably. How can we help our neighbor more quickly overcome their loss, grief, depression, and thoughts, and plans towards suicide? In 2.5 minutes? Well, obviously, if this person's having thoughts of suicide, the calculus really changes, and that goes back to some, I think, what we've been presenting throughout the day. That person needs urgent help. So if that's a real concern, if that's something that you feel like is serious, then whatever you have to do to come alongside and give that person help, give the person help. Grief and depression, loss, it depends on age, it depends on if this person maybe lost a spouse and they've been married for 50 years, or if it's, grief is not grief, so it kind of depends on the nature of the loss. The only thing I would say is if the person's elderly or older, and if they're male, for instance, other than younger adults, older males are at the highest risk of suicide, and they use very lethal means, so they almost always succeed. So there are so many aspects to this I don't really know the answers to, that it's hard for me to fully kind of answer it. But within the church context, I love grief share, and I don't know if this church has a grief share ministry or not, but I love grief share. Plugging them into a grief share, if that's something you're open to, staying connected to them and close to them. I know when I was going through my own loss, I had an older man who literally met with me once a month. I didn't even know him before this period of time. Met with me once a month, and really, mostly what he did is just said, Kevin, this is where you were last month, this is where you are this month, this is what I see happening in your life. And just that alone was amazing to me. He was just like, there's so many in church. So there are a lot of ways to attend to someone who has great deal of loss, and my book comes out in spring. There's a chapter in grief, mourning, and loss, so be sure to get that. No, I'm joking.
Thank you. I think we will end for now and have Kent do a blessing. Thank you all for being a part of this. I think it's a really an amazing thing that you all came, and the people who came to speak today, it's like they were all. Doing what you do and coming and being a part of it.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, let's thank Tom for his speech. I know the booths will be available for, I think, another hour. Some of the folks here who talk will be around a little bit if we didn't address your question. We'll talk to somebody who can. I was thinking, as Chris was talking, I was thinking about a passage in Scripture that's always spoken to me in this area, which is in 1 Kings, when we see Elijah call down fire from heaven, and a couple chapters later, he's hiding in a cave somewhere. And I thought, how easy it is for the prophet of God to believe fully that God will bring fire down and eliminate this enemy. And a few pages later, the same guy is afraid of some woman, and he is hiding in a cave. And it's interesting to read what he does there, because he doesn't eat. He goes to this cave and sleeps, and he's rehearsing in his mind all the things he's going to say to God when he gets an opportunity to. And then when God addresses him, he repeats that verbatim. This run of how lonely I am, how horrible it is, how my life is miserable, and I'm all alone, I'm the only one. And I love the fact that God just comes in and ministers. He sends spirits to minister to him, to feed him, lets him rest, but just stays present in that moment. God doesn't come and chastise him for being down. He just says, you're not alone. I got someplace else for you to be right now. You're where you need to be. I need you to get up. I need you to move. We got a plan, and I'm still with you. And I think that is in many ways a picture of the way that we need to be gracious and caring for people who are struggling. Because a few pages earlier they were doing great, but right now they're not. And when I'm doing great, I need to come alongside those folks who are not. And when I'm down, I'm hopeful that there will be somebody there who will come along and help me get back up and get back in the game. So coming together as community, as leaders, as Christians is all about. And so I'm grateful for this season and the opportunity to be a little more educated. And hopefully you got something here that will give you a little more hope for whatever it is you're wrestling with, whatever brought you here today. That you'll go with some sort of hope toward the next step for you or for someone you care about. Let me pray for us. God, we thank you for making us so incredibly complex and amazing, that we could come away from any experience having to do with the human body and not marvel at a creator who is far beyond our ability to comprehend. And yet in that complexity, Lord, there are parts of this fall that make us deal with things we'd rather not, and aging alone, and in the process, elements of our brain that maybe aren't firing quite right. Lord, there are so many elements that we still don't even understand. But as we've gotten better understanding, help us to blend the two together, Lord, to be able to listen to those who understand, and to be able to listen to your Spirit guide us and direct us. And Father, I just pray over those who are here today. Lord, I don't know what brought them here, but I know that there are stories, many stories of hurt and heartache and pain, family members. Lord, we just pray for them right now, that your Holy Spirit would meet them. Father, would you pour out your Spirit upon them? Would you give them hope and encouragement? And we pray specifically for those maybe here or those who aren't here that we know that are struggling with depression, struggling with anxiety, struggling with suicidal thoughts. Lord, would your Spirit just in this day, as we think about those people in our individual minds, Lord, would you take all those people and all those names and all those stories, Lord, would you just touch them right now in the name of Jesus? Would you give hope where hope is missing? Would you give direction and clarity? Pray for that for myself and pray for that for all who are here. May our God, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May he keep your whole mind, soul, body, and spirit safe to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who called you is faithful, and he will do it. In the name of the Father, and the Son,